Hello class, we are at another very interesting site here in the city of Jerusalem. We are actually right now standing on the grounds of the Pool of Bethesda, and you can see some of the archaeological remains behind me. This is quite the complicated site. There are at least 4 levels of building structures here that date back to the Hasmonean period at least. And you might remember, if you have your Jerusalem maps handy, that while today the Pool of Bethesda site is inside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, in the time of Jesus, the Pool of Bethesda was outside of the city walls of Jerusalem and just north of the Temple Mount. This place, the Pool of Bethesda, actually 2 different pools, a northern pool and a southern pool. We can see today those structures and parts of the remains of those structures. We'll look at those here in this lecture here in just a little bit. But as you know, the connection that we have with Jesus to the Pool of Bethesda is this is the location where Jesus healed a lame man. And so I'd like to read that passage of Scripture with you and then walk through the site and point out some interesting features here of the archaeology. So this is John chapter 5, beginning at verse 1, the healing at the pool on the Sabbath. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. That's the event that happened here at this particular site. Now let's take a walk around the site and examine some of the archaeology. All right, here we are once again at the Pool of Bethesda, and I've mentioned before that the Pool of Bethesda is actually 2 pools. There's a northern pool and a southern pool. And what we are standing on right now is a dam, a structure that holds back the water from the northern pool to the southern pool. The Pool of Bethesda served, most scholars are in agreement, that it served as a mikveh, a water purification site where Jews would come and ritually purify themselves before then going into the temple. And the temple's only about, the temple complex is only about 100 yards off to my left. And so what made the pools of Bethesda really a mikveh is that the water would flow in from the northern pool here to my right, and that's where that water would be captured. And then there was a channel between the northern pool and the southern pool that went through this dam. This is the dam that I'm standing on. And then to the left of where I'm standing is the southern pool. The southern pool is where people would go in to be ritually purified. And this is according to Jewish law. You have to be ritually purified in what's called living water, water that's on the move. And of course the water in the northern pool is not on the move. It's a reservoir. Water is captured here and then channeled into the southern pool, which then technically, according to Jewish law, is living water or moving water, which allows a person to be ritually purified. So we're standing right here in the dam portion of the Pool of Bethesda. Now, what makes this very interesting is if you look at the description of the Pool of Bethesda here in our text, it tells us here in our text, that this is a pool that had 5 roofed colonnades, or 5 porches. The text tells us that in John chapter 5, verse 2. And for a long time, scholars tried to figure out what does it mean? What does it mean that the Pool of Bethesda had 5 porched colonnades? And then when the archaeologists discovered and uncovered this particular site, they understood with more detail what was meant by that. Well, you have the Pool of Bethesda, which is actually 2 pools, and there's a colonnade, a roofed colonnade around the perimeter of those pools. That makes, of course, 4 roofed colonnades, and then 1 colonnade down the middle on the dam that we are standing on right now, and that makes for 5 roofed colonnades. If you look behind me, you can see one of the structures, the remains of one of the structures that was built here much, much later. I mentioned there's at least 4 levels of construction here at the site, going all the way back down to the Hasmonean period. One of those structures is a chapel built by the Crusaders in the 11th and 12th century. So, very complicated site, but all of it points back to a very important event that happened in the life of Jesus. All right, once again, we are here at the Pool of Bethesda, and now we are looking down. We're looking down into the southern pool. I'm standing on the dam that is between the northern and the southern pool, and now we're looking down into the archaeological remains of the southern pool. And what you see down there would have been at ground level in the first century, and you see, if you look very closely, a series of steps that leads down into what would have been the pool in the first century, filled with water. Of course, now it's filled with debris, but in antiquity, filled with water. And so this is one section that has been uncovered by archaeologists of the steps that lead down into the Pool of Bethesda. So here's the interesting question. Is this the steps? Are these the steps that served as a setting for the story in John chapter 5? Can you envision that this is one possible location where the lame man was laying for many, many years, waiting to be healed? It could very well be. Now, archaeologists have not been able to excavate this whole site because today there are houses actually and residences right up against the archaeological remains, so only part of the northern and southern pools have been excavated, but this is one section of the southern pool that has been excavated. Might this be the place, maybe, where the lame man was laying and Jesus came along and healed him? If you look off to the left, you'll see a couple of pillars there that are built down into the southern pool of the Pool of Bethesda. And what those pillars are is those are support pillars that were used in the 4th century to build a massive Byzantine church here to commemorate the site of the miracle of the healing of the lame man. Okay, so many layers of archaeology here, which is one of the reasons why it makes this a very difficult site to interpret. All right, here's another perspective. Again, we're standing on the dam that separated the northern pool, which is behind me, from the southern pool, which is behind the camera. One of the very interesting pieces about this passage is actually a textual variant that we find in John chapter 5. You might remember at the beginning of the text, it tells us that at the pool called Bethesda there lay a multitude of invalids there, and when Jesus confronted the man says in verse 7, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred, and while I am going, another steps in before me." And of course, interpreters have wondered what in the world is that all about? That this lame man is waiting on the steps for the waters to be stirred, and then he tries to get into the pool before somebody else does, and he can never get there. Well, there's if you look in the passage of Scripture at the footnotes, you'll notice that some late manuscripts include an explanation there. Now, it's probably not in the original text. Matter of fact, the oldest manuscripts that we have of the Gospel of John don't have these verses, but some later manuscripts have these verses, and let me read them to you. They're meant to be kind of an explanation of what the lame man was talking about. So here's the note at the bottom of my ESV text. It says, some manuscripts insert, waiting for the moving of the water, for the angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was healed of whatever disease he had. Now that's in a footnote. It's in some later manuscripts, not in the oldest, most reliable ones that we have. So it appears to be what we might call a scribal insertion to explain what's going on there. So while I don't think this is original to the text, I think it may represent a superstition that was found in early Judaism connected to this particular site. And that is, at various points, the water in the southern pool was stirred a little bit, producing little waves, and the people thought, by means of superstition, that might be an angel that's stirring the waters. But what we know from the archaeology now, though, and I mentioned it before, that at various points there was a channel opened up between the northern and the southern pool, which allowed water to flow from the northern pool, which would have been at a higher level, to flow into the southern pool to elevate the water, and that certainly would have caused a kind of stirring of the water in the southern pool. People in that time period may have thought that was an angel stirring the water rather than the mechanism of the water pouring from the northern to the southern pool. So that explains the scribal insertion that we have here, and it might explain the superstition that the lame man might have had, and it might indeed play into the story. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. We are looking at now the southeastern corner of the Pool of Bethesda. And what we're looking at is a rather odd small building that has confounded archaeologists here as they've excavated this site. What they found when they excavated this portion of the Pool of Bethesda is they found a structure, and embedded in the floor of the structure were lots of what's called votive offering pieces. These are in clay body parts like a foot or a hand or a leg with inscription on those pieces. And the inscription was basically a prayer to the Greek god Asclepius. Asclepius is the Greek god of healing. The Greek god of healing. He's often portrayed as a snake on a pole. This is the symbol that doctors often use, and you'll see them have that kind of symbol on their on the collar of their white jackets. Right? Asclepius is the Greek god of healing, and so it's confounded archaeologists because, on the one hand, this site is clearly a mikveh. It's where pious Jews in the first century would go to ceremonially cleanse themselves before then going into the temple. But then we have this pagan shrine to the Greek god Asclepius. So how do we understand both of these things happening in such close proximity? Well, here's one theory. Remember, also located just to the north and to the west of the temple in the first century was the Antonia Fortress. And of course, who was in the Antonia Fortress? Roman soldiers. So these Roman soldiers, were not Jewish, and what was their religion? They were Greco-Romans, they were pagans, and they worshipped a number of gods. And so when they became ill, or when their foot was hurting, or their leg was hurting, or their hand was hurting, they would offer up these votive offerings to the Greco-Roman god of healing, asking for healing, and that Greek god, of course, was Asclepius. So what's fascinating here is we've got two things going on here at this site. On the one hand, it's a location for faithful Jews to be ritually purified, and we find a Jewish man who's been lame for a long, long period of time at this site in the southern pool, waiting to be healed. And then we have Greco-Romans. We have Roman soldiers coming to another section of this site, offering up offerings to their Greco-Roman god of healing. So healing is kind of the common feature of this site, whether you're Jewish or whether you're a pagan Gentile. So one way to interpret the John 5 healing text, which I find fascinating, is not only that it produces a Sabbath controversy. If you read on in John 5, you see that there's a Sabbath controversy that emerges because Jesus heals the lame man on the Sabbath day. But also, if you read the rest of John chapter 5, you'll see that there's an exposition on life there at the end of John 5. Life. And Jesus talks about in John chapter 5 that the Father has given him, Jesus, authority to give life. To give life. And so, what one interpretation of this healing could be, if you know something about this particular site in antiquity, is that Jesus comes to give life to both Jew and to Gentile. And that Jesus claims authority over things like superstition, which apparently the lame man was experiencing, superstition, wanting to get into the water when the water was stirred. But Jesus also lays claim to the false claims of the Greco-Roman gods as well. So Asclepius doesn't heal, but it's Jesus who gives life. So that brings all this together, The Pool of Bethesda, a place of healing. But Jesus comes, lays claim to this site, and he claims to be the one who is the author of life, the one who brings life, the one who brings healing, the one who brings wholeness, whether you are Jew or Gentile. Now this has, of course, direct application to us, doesn't it? We seek to find life in all kinds of different ways, through money, through our career, through our schoolwork. We try to find life through relationships, friendships, marriage, and all those things. Those things are good. It's not wrong. It's not wrong to make money. It's not wrong to have a job and to be good at it. It's not wrong to have a spouse and to have friends. But when we seek to find our life wrapped up in those things, we will be sorely disappointed, because there's no way they can be a God substitute. Only Jesus Christ is the author of life. Only Jesus Christ brings us the ultimate healing. And that's what the Pool of Bethesda is all about.